It began with a message, a vibration on a phone, a question, a look, then a silence that felt like it was waiting to break. Behind that door, something happened. Something violent, something irreversible. No witnesses, no cameras, just sound, shadow, and the few clues that survived the night. This is the story of those missing minutes. And the truth investigators had to rebuild from the damage left behind. Are you ready for the darkest stories Britain has to offer? Introducing our new book, Unreal True Crime, British edition, 35 shocking true murder cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat, available now on Amazon and paperback and Kindle. Or grab your instant PDF download from our website. Links are in the description below. Don't miss out. Get your copy today. And now, let's continue with today's case. Marie Trintignant was born in January 1962 in the Paris suburb of Boulogne-Billancourt, in a family that already breathed cinema. Her father, Jean-Louis, was one of the most respected actors in France, and her mother, Nadine, wrote and directed films. From the beginning, Marie's life unfolded between studios, film sets, and living rooms, full of scripts and passionate conversations about art. At home, there were also brothers and a little sister, Pauline, and for a brief time the house felt full and noisy, a place where adults and children mixed with the strange normality of a film clan. As a child, Marie was shy but very observant. She preferred to stay close to her parents, watching faces and gestures, rather than leading games in the street. Adults around her later remembered a quiet girl who seemed to listen more than she spoke, with large dark eyes that followed everything. Her parents took her with them when they worked, and very early she learned that lights, cameras, and long days on set were part of ordinary life. For her, seeing an actor break down in tears in front of a camera was not strange. It was simply what adults did for a living. When Marie was still very young, tragedy entered the family in a brutal way. Her baby sister Pauline died suddenly. The shock tore something open in the parents and in the children. For Marie, the loss marked a before and after. In the months that followed, she withdrew into herself. She spoke less, sometimes almost not at all, and carried an invisible weight that no one fully knew how to lift. Her parents, devastated themselves, did what they could, but the house no longer sounded the same. This early confrontation with death stayed with Marie and shaped a sensitivity that later appeared in her work. As she grew into her teenage years, Marie remained reserved, but had a strong inner world. She liked reading, music, and the long silences of cinema seats, where she could disappear in other stories. At school, she did not become a rebellious celebrity child. Instead, she often tried to blend into the background. But outside the classroom, the film world called to her again and again. She stepped in front of the camera for the first time as a very young child in one of her mother's films, and little by little that game became a serious path. The separation of her parents in the mid-1970s added another fracture to her life. She was still a teenager when the marriage ended. She stayed connected to both of them, but family life became more fragmented and complex. At the same time, her interest in acting became more solid. The shy girl who stayed in the corner began to use that same capacity for observation in front of the camera, turning it into a quiet but powerful presence. Directors noticed that she could express pain, doubt, and sarcasm with a simple movement of the eyes or a small shift of the mouth. By the end of the 1970s and the early 1980s, Marie was a young woman moving naturally between stages and sets. She took roles that were sometimes small but memorable, and she learned from experienced actors around her. She did not have the classical beauty that the industry often demanded, but she had something else, a raw truthfulness that made her compelling to watch. She played wounded women, marginal figures, characters who lied, drank, wandered, and fought, and she did it without judging them. The tragedies of her own life seemed to give her a deep intuition for suffering. In her personal life, Marie loved intensely. Relationships for her were not light affairs, but storms. As a young adult, she fell in love with musicians and actors, men who, like her, lived unstable lives full of travel and long nights. With the drummer Richard Kalinka, she had her first son, Roman, and discovered that motherhood added both joy and pressure. Later, she formed a couple with actor François Cluzet, with whom she had another son, Paul. Each relationship brought a different mix of tenderness and conflict, of shared passion and painful separations. In the 1990s, she had a son, Léon, with Matthias Othnin-Gerard, and in 1998 she married the writer and director, Samuel Benchetri. With him, she had her youngest son, Jules. By the turn of the millennium, Marie was a mother of 4 boys, with 4 different fathers, a successful actress, and a woman constantly balancing professional commitments with the emotional demands of a complex family life. She tried to be present for her children, even when her work took her away, bringing them on set when she could, and returning home exhausted but loving. Despite the pressures, her career remained strong. She acted in films, television projects, and plays, and she kept working with directors who valued her intensity. Many of her characters were women who did not fit social norms, women who lied or drank or made bad decisions but remained human and recognizable. Viewers felt that Marie gave those characters a kind of dignity that went beyond the script. Off-screen, however, she struggled with mood swings, insecurity, and the weight of past traumas. She sometimes found escape in work, and sometimes in romantic passion. By the early 2000s, Marie stood at an apparent high point. She was widely respected as an actress. She had a strong circle of friends in the artistic world. And although her love life had been complicated, she had a family built around her 4 sons. Her marriage to Samuel Benchetrit, however, was no longer stable. The relationship had become strained, and the couple lived with growing distance. In that emotional landscape, full of work, motherhood, and unresolved pain, a new relationship entered her life, one that would change everything. Bertrand Cantat was born in 1964 in the southwestern city of Pau and grew up to become the charismatic singer and lyricist of Noir Désir, a band that became a pillar of French rock. With his wild hair, intense eyes, and explosive stage presence, he attracted crowds and admiration. His songs carried political messages, anger at injustice, and a romantic idea of revolt. To many young people in France, he represented authenticity and rebellion. He also cultivated a thoughtful side, reading widely and writing lyrics that fans saw as poetic and deep. He later married the Hungarian writer and cultural figure Christina Redi, and they had 2 children together. Marie and Bertrand met when both were already known figures in France. They entered each other's lives around 2002, when Marie went to see the band play and later spent time with him. She was in her late 30s, he in his late 30s too. She was still married to Samuel Benchetrit, although the relationship was fragile. He was still officially tied to Christina, even if their marriage had its own cracks. They were 2 intense people at a moment of dissatisfaction, and the connection between them was immediate. In the early days, their relationship felt electrifying. The actress and the rock singer shared late-night conversations about art, politics, and their personal wounds. Both carried childhood traumas and adult disappointments. Both knew what it meant to perform for others. Marie felt that Bertrand understood her, that he saw past the image of the actress to the vulnerable woman beneath. He, in turn, seemed fascinated by her combination of fragility and fire. They immersed themselves quickly in each other's worlds, traveling together and showing up side by side in public. At first, friends and colleagues saw them as a passionate couple, a meeting of two strong artistic personalities. They argued and reconciled with the intensity of people who lived everything in high contrast. That kind of love story had a certain romantic aura in the circles they moved in, where drama often seemed normal. Marie, who had always loved deeply, let herself fall once again, convinced that this time she had found a partner who matched her energy and her pain. But beneath the surface, signs of danger appeared early. Bertrand was not only passionate, he was also jealous and controlling. He did not like her past relationships or the fact that she shared children with several former partners. He worried about other men around her, about messages on her phone, about the time she spent away from him. Small arguments about trust quickly became explosive scenes. Marie, used to emotional turbulence, tried at first to minimize what was happening. She told herself that jealousy was a twisted proof of love, that he would calm down, that she could handle it. People close to her noticed changes. She appeared more tired, more anxious. The couple's fights sometimes left marks not only on their moods but also physically. Stories circulated of violent arguments, doors slammed, objects thrown. There were moments when Marie reportedly tried to end the relationship or create distance, but the bond between them pulled her back. The same intensity that made their connection feel unique also made it hard for her to step away. The separation from Samuel became definitive, and the two worlds in which Marie moved began to collide. On one side were her children, her work, her parents and ex-partners who worried about her stability. On the other side was a man who demanded more and more of her attention and loyalty. Marie often found herself in the middle, trying to keep the peace, trying to believe that with enough love, the violence and paranoia would fade. By mid-2003, the relationship between Marie and Bertrand had entered a dangerous cycle. Periods of apparent calm were followed by eruptions of anger. Jealousy became a constant theme. Friends would later say that she seemed trapped in a whirlwind, still convinced that she could help him, still hoping that this intense love would settle into something safe. Instead, the tension followed her into her work and into the last project she ever accepted. In the summer of 2003, Marie travelled to Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania, for a television film about the French writer Colette. Her mother, Nadine, was directing the production, and Marie played the lead role. The project united work and family once more, something that had defined her life from the very beginning. Vilnius was far from the familiar streets of Paris, but the team created a small bubble there, with cast and crew trying to focus on long days of filming. Bertrand joined her on this trip. For him, the foreign city meant time away from his own band commitments and from France, time alone with Marie in a new environment. For her, his presence meant comfort and constant tension at the same time. He did not simply visit, he became part of her daily life on set, waiting for her between scenes, sharing meals, coming back with her to the hotel in the evenings. The weeks in Vilnius were demanding. Marie spent many hours in costume and makeup, recreating Colette's life under her mother's careful direction. At the end of those days, she returned to the hotel tired. The couple's relationship did not stay outside the workspace. Arguments erupted about messages on her phone, about people she spoke to, about her contact with Samuel, and with the fathers of her other children. Some colleagues noticed that she seemed more tense as the shoot advanced, but production kept moving forward. Schedules, call sheets and scripts left little room for anyone to fully understand how dangerous things had become behind the closed door of the hotel room. In the last days of July, the tension reached a breaking point. Marie was living between work pressure and emotional instability. She had children and family far away, a demanding role on set, and a partner whose mood could change in an instant. On the night of 26th to 27th July, she and Bertrand returned to their hotel after spending the evening out. At some point, she received a text message from Samuel. A simple message from her estranged husband, related to their shared child, became the spark for a new explosion. Inside the hotel room, the argument quickly escalated. The jealousy that had been simmering for months came out with full force. Words turned into shouts, and shouts turned into violence. Neighbours later remembered hearing noises, but in a busy hotel with different guests and languages, no one fully understood what was happening in that room. What happened next remained known only through later reconstructions, medical reports, and Bertrand's own changing versions. What became clear was that Marie suffered a brutal beating that night. She received multiple blows to the head, strong enough to cause serious brain injuries. At some point, she lost consciousness. Instead of calling for help immediately, Bertrand stayed in the room with her, believing or convincing himself that she was simply asleep or passed out. Hours passed. The woman who had given life to 4 sons, who had carried so many characters on screen, lay motionless, while the man who said he loved her failed to seek the urgent help she needed. By the morning, her condition was impossible to ignore. Her brother, who was also in Vilnius, was called to the room. Faced with Marie's state, he raised the alarm. An ambulance finally arrived and took her to a local hospital. Doctors there saw at once that the injuries were severe. They operated and tried to reduce the swelling in her brain, but the damage was catastrophic. She slipped into a deep coma, connected to machines that kept her body alive while her family tried to understand what had happened in the night. News travelled quickly back to France. Jean-Louis and Nadine, who had already known too much loss, found themselves once again standing in hospital corridors. In Vilnius, they faced language barriers, the unfamiliar medical system, and the shock of seeing their daughter, still young, lying motionless with bandages and tubes. For Nadine, the pain was doubled. Her daughter had been injured in the middle of a project they were making together, a story of a strong woman that now ran in parallel to the collapse of her own child's life. The family decided to have Marie transferred to France. A medical plane took her from Vilnius to the suburb of Neuilly-sur-Seine, near Paris, where she was admitted to a clinic. Her sons, her ex-partners, her friends and colleagues gathered around this new hospital bed. They spoke to doctors, waited for updates, and clung to the small hope that she might wake up. But the injuries to her brain were too extensive. On August 1st, 2003, just a few days after the assault, Marie died. She was 41 years old. Her death devastated those who loved her and sent shockwaves through France. Headlines spoke of the actress killed by her rock star partner. Fans who had grown up with her films and with Noir Désir struggled to understand how the man whose songs had inspired them could be at the centre of such violence. For her parents, none of the public noise mattered. They had lost another daughter, this time not to mysterious fate, but to an act of cruelty. In Lithuania, police had acted quickly after the incident. They had taken Bertrand into custody shortly after Marie was admitted to hospital. From the beginning, he acknowledged that he had hit her, but he presented the events as a tragic accident, a night that went too far without murderous intent. Investigators did not simply take his word. They gathered medical reports, examined the hotel room, listened to witnesses, and tried to reconstruct the timeline of the night. The autopsy later confirmed what doctors had already suspected. Marie's injuries were consistent with multiple strong impacts to the head, not with one fall. Bruises and fractures showed that she had suffered a severe beating. The forensic conclusions, combined with the hours of delay before anyone called for help, became central pieces of evidence. They painted the picture of a prolonged assault and a failure to take basic steps to save her life. Authorities charged Bertrand under Lithuanian law with a form of homicide that recognized indirect intent. That meant they believed he had not necessarily set out with the plan to kill Marie, but that he had accepted the risk that his violence could be fatal. The case moved quickly toward trial, which attracted intense media attention in both Lithuania and France. Journalists travelled to Vilnius, and photos of a pale, thin singer entering the courtroom appeared on the front pages. During the hearings, prosecutors described the relationship as one poisoned by jealousy and control. They pointed to previous incidents, to Marie's fear, and to the autopsy. They emphasized the delay in calling an ambulance, arguing that someone who truly believed he had only delivered a few harmless blows would not have waited so long while his partner lay unconscious. They presented the case as a clear example of intimate partner violence that had escalated to its most extreme form. The defense tried to push back. Lawyers insisted that the couple had been mutually volatile, that the fight had been a tragic overflow of emotion, not a cold-blooded attack. They argued that he had panicked, that he had misjudged the seriousness of her injuries, that he had never imagined she could die. They portrayed him as a man crushed by guilt, not as a deliberate killer. Psychological experts spoke about his personality and his history of depression, trying to add nuance to a story that for many observers already seemed painfully simple. Witnesses included members of Marie's family and people who had known the couple. Some described earlier episodes that suggested a pattern of violence. Others tried to protect their own memories while answering direct questions. The courtroom became a place where not only a crime, but an entire relationship was dissected. Each side selected moments and signs to support its version of events. Outside, the public followed every development, while feminist groups began to talk more loudly about patterns of male violence against women that went far beyond this one famous case. The court found Bertrand guilty and sentenced him to 8 years in prison. For Marie's family, the verdict brought formal recognition that what had happened was not an accident, but the sentence felt small compared to the finality of their loss. After a period in a Lithuanian prison, he was transferred to a facility in France to serve the rest of his time. In practice, with the rules of conditional release, he spent only a few years behind bars before walking out under supervision. When he returned to ordinary life, public opinion was deeply divided. Some fans, unable to reconcile the artist with the crime, tried to see him as a man who had paid his debt. Others refused to forgive or forget, insisting that he should not be allowed to return to the stage or the spotlight. Debates erupted around every attempt he made to resume musical activities. Concert announcements were met with protests. For many women's groups, he became a symbol of how lightly society sometimes treated violence against women, especially when the perpetrator was talented and admired. Meanwhile, Marie's family tried to live with their grief. Her sons grew up without their mother, carrying her face in photographs and screen performances rather than in daily life. Her parents, already aged, lived with a second great absence. Nadine wrote and spoke about her daughter, describing not just the night of the assault, but the fullness of her life, the humour, the affection, the vulnerability. Jean-Louis, who had played so many men carrying loss on screen, now carried a similar weight in private. In a different way, Christina also lived with the consequences of the case, and years later she died by suicide, adding another layer of tragedy around Bertrand and the families connected to him. In France, the killing of Marie pushed conversations about domestic violence into the centre of public debate. At the time of her death, many newspapers still used expressions like crime of passion, a term that tended to romanticize extreme violence against a partner. Activists and specialists argued that this language hid the reality of control, repeated aggression, and patterns that were anything but romantic. They used Marie's case as a clear example of what could happen when jealousy, possession, and lack of accountability were allowed to grow unchecked. Over the years, as more cases of femicide came to light and movements for women's rights gained strength, people looked back on what had happened to Marie with new eyes. They saw not only a famous actress and a rock star, but a very common story. A woman who fell in love, who tried to make a difficult relationship work, who saw warning signs but hoped for change, and who ended up killed by the man who claimed to love her. Her fame made the story visible, but similar stories were repeating every year in homes that never reached the news. Marie had been more than the headlines, and more than the last violent night. She had been a shy child who grew into a complex adult, a mother of 4, a dedicated actress who brought truth to her roles, and a woman searching for stability and love. Remembering her meant seeing all of that. Not only the bruise colours on medical photographs or the legal terms in a judgment, it meant acknowledging the way her work moved audiences and the way her death shook a country.